The alarm goes off, and he is already in motion, sitting up fast, feet on the floor, moving toward the bathroom before the room has fully come into focus. It is a habit built over 50 years of early mornings and full schedules. He is efficient. He is disciplined. He feels fine. But in the 30 seconds between the alarm and the moment he stands, something is happening inside his cardiovascular system that his efficiency has never accounted for, and that no doctor has ever taken the time to explain. The way we wake up matters in ways that medicine rarely communicates clearly. There is a growing body of research, much of it from sleep cardiology and chronobiology, documenting that the transition from sleep to waking is one of the highest-risk cardiovascular windows of the entire day. The habits that fill the first 30 seconds to 10 minutes of the morning either protect a heart that is navigating its daily pressure peak, or they stress it unnecessarily. Most people have no idea this window exists, let alone that specific behaviors during it carry meaningful cardiac risk, particularly after 60, when the cardiovascular system has less reserve and less tolerance for abrupt demand. My name is Dr. Noris. I am a cardiologist with 22 years of clinical experience, with a particular focus on cardiovascular risk and morning cardiac events in adults over 60. What motivated this video is the consistency with which preventable morning habits appear in the histories of patients who arrive at the hospital, and the fact that a brief, clear conversation about those habits could have changed what happened. After 60, the morning cardiovascular environment is uniquely demanding. In the final stage of sleep, the body begins releasing cortisol and adrenaline to prepare for waking. Blood pressure, which has been lower overnight, climbs sharply toward its daytime peak. The blood itself is slightly more viscous after hours of low fluid intake during sleep, making it more prone to clotting. The platelets, the small blood cells involved in clot formation, are more reactive in the morning than at any other time of day, a pattern documented in research including the landmark Physicians' Health Study, which identified that the incidence of heart attacks peaks in the morning hours between 6 and noon. Against this backdrop, elevated pressure, thicker blood, reactive platelets, and arterial walls that after 60 are less elastic and potentially carrying decades of accumulated plaque. The 30-second morning habit I am about to describe is not a minor inconvenience. It is a genuine cardiovascular stressor arriving at the worst possible moment. Before I walk through the habits, I want to ask you something. Do you consider yourself someone who wakes up slowly, or someone who is up and moving within seconds of the alarm? Just type slow or fast in the comments. I am genuinely curious where this community lands. The first and most consequential morning habit I want to address is jumping out of bed immediately when the alarm sounds, moving from horizontal to fully upright and active within seconds, without any transition period. When the body has been lying flat for 7 or 8 hours, blood distributes differently than it does during the day. The moment you stand, gravity pulls a significant volume of blood toward the lower body, and the cardiovascular system must immediately compensate, raising heart rate, constricting peripheral blood vessels, and increasing cardiac output, all in a matter of seconds. In a younger adult with elastic arteries and a responsive nervous system, this adjustment happens smoothly. After 60, the arterial walls are stiffer, less able to expand and contract quickly, and the body's internal regulation system is slower to recalibrate. The result is a sudden, uncompensated pressure swing that arrives at arteries which may already carry narrowing from decades of accumulated plaque. Think of it as turning on a high-pressure hose through a pipe that has never been gradually pressurized. The sudden demand strains the system at its most vulnerable points. Research published in journals including Hypertension has documented that abrupt postural changes in the morning produce the sharpest cardiovascular pressure swings of the day in older adults. A man named Callum, a former harbor pilot who had spent decades waking before dawn for tidal windows and had built a lifetime habit of moving immediately upon alarm, came to see me after a brief episode of chest tightness one morning that resolved before he reached the hospital. He was moving within 3 seconds of the alarm, every day, without exception. We introduced a 2-minute protocol of remaining seated on the edge of the bed before standing. He told me at his next visit it had been the most difficult habit he had ever changed, not because it was hard, but because it felt wrong to be still. The practical fix: When the alarm sounds, do not stand immediately. Sit up slowly. Remain seated on the edge of the bed for at least 60 seconds. Then stand. Give your cardiovascular system the runway it needs to catch up before you ask it to perform. The second morning habit that carries specific cardiac risk is straining on the toilet immediately after waking, particularly when constipation makes straining prolonged and forceful. The Valsalva maneuver, which is what happens physiologically when you hold your breath and bear down, dramatically increases pressure inside the chest and abdomen, while simultaneously reducing blood return to the heart. When the effort releases, blood floods back into the heart, and the pressure swings sharply. For a cardiovascular system already at its morning peak, elevated pressure, reactive platelets, thickened blood, this abrupt pressure oscillation in the first minutes of the day is a meaningful additional stressor. The association between straining at stool and cardiac events is documented in the medical literature and is taken seriously enough that avoiding straining is a standard recommendation following heart surgery. A woman named Philippa, a former landscape architect who came to see me after her husband noticed she seemed pale and breathless one morning in the bathroom, described a pattern of significant morning straining that had been part of her routine for years without anyone ever asking about it. She had not connected it to any cardiac concern. We addressed her constipation with a targeted approach: fiber, hydration, a toilet footstool to improve positioning, and the straining resolved. The practical fix: if morning straining is part of your regular routine, bring it to your doctor as a cardiovascular conversation, not just a digestive one. It is addressable, and addressing it removes an unnecessary morning cardiac stressor. The third habit is one that feels energizing and health positive, and that is immediately drinking a large glass of very cold water or cold coffee the moment you are up, before giving the body any transition time. After lying horizontal for hours, the cardiovascular system is navigating its morning pressure peak on slightly dehydrated, thicker blood. Rapid cold fluid intake triggers a reflex response through the vagus nerve, the body's calming system, which can briefly slow the heart rate before the sympathetic system overcorrects, producing a pressure swing. Cold specifically adds a thermal stressor that causes peripheral vasoconstriction, narrowing of small blood vessels near the skin, which increases the load on the heart. This combination of vagal stimulation and peripheral vasoconstriction, arriving at a heart already under the morning pressure surge, is a compound stressor rather than a simple one. A man named Osvaldo, a former deep-sea diver who prided himself on physical discipline and cold tolerance, and who had begun every morning with a large glass of ice water for over a decade as part of a wellness protocol, came to see me after 2 episodes of palpitations in the minutes after drinking it. Both resolved quickly. His cardiovascular workup was otherwise unremarkable for his age. Removing the ice, switching to room temperature water, and waiting until 15 minutes after rising eliminated the palpitations entirely. The practical fix: hydrate in the morning, that matters, but use room temperature water. Sip it gradually rather than drinking a large volume all at once, and wait at least 10 to 15 minutes after waking before your first fluid intake. If you are still here and finding this useful, type the word heart in the comments right now. It tells me who is staying through the full conversation. The fourth habit is one that almost no one considers a cardiovascular behavior, and that is the emotional and cognitive content of the first 60 seconds after waking. For many adults over 60 who are managing health concerns, financial pressures, or family responsibilities, the moment of waking is the moment the worry returns. Before the body is even fully upright, the mind is processing tomorrow's appointment, an unresolved conversation, a financial decision with no clean answer. This anticipatory stress, worry about what is coming rather than what is happening, produces a cortisol response that compounds the cortisol surge already occurring as part of the natural morning biological preparation. The combined cortisol load arriving on a cardiovascular system at its morning peak, in arteries carrying decades of accumulated history, is not neutral. Research from groups at Carnegie Mellon University studying stress physiology has documented that anticipatory psychological stress generates cortisol responses comparable in magnitude to acute situational stress. When that lands on an already elevated morning baseline, the pressure consequence is measurable. A woman named Saoirse, a former social worker who had spent 30 years holding other people's difficulties, and who had never developed a practice of not doing so in the first moments of her own mornings, came to see me after her home blood pressure monitor showed readings in the first 30 minutes after waking that were dramatically higher than any reading she got later in the day. Nothing was medically wrong in the conventional sense, but her mornings opened with a full accounting of every current worry, beginning before she had stood up. We introduced 2 minutes of slow breathing before she allowed her mind to engage with any thought about the day. Her morning readings shifted meaningfully within 3 weeks. The practical fix: before you engage with any worry or task in the morning, give your mind and your cardiovascular system 2 minutes of slow breathing. 4 counts in, 6 counts out. It is not a spiritual practice unless you want it to be. It is physiology. The 5th morning habit is the one that operates most invisibly, because it does not feel like a habit at all. It feels like nothing. And that is lying completely still in bed after waking, scrolling on a phone, for an extended period before standing. This is the opposite of jumping up too fast, and it might seem like it would be protective. The problem is different. When the body wakes and the morning hormonal surge begins, cortisol and adrenaline rising, heart rate and blood pressure climbing, the natural physiological resolution of that surge involves the body moving. Gentle movement helps the cardiovascular system complete its morning transition smoothly, distributing the hormonal load through muscle activity and circulation. Prolonged stillness while awake and cortisol elevated means the morning surge continues without the movement that would help resolve it. The pressure and the hormonal activation build without an outlet. Studies examining morning cortisol and cardiovascular outcomes have found that how the morning surge is resolved matters as well as how it is initiated. Extended horizontal phone use after waking, while remaining in a cortisol-elevated state, is not rest. It is sustained activation without resolution. A man named Alistair, a former wildlife documentary editor who worked long hours at a screen, and whose first act after waking was always to continue that screen relationship, lying in bed for 30 to 45 minutes, came to see me with morning blood pressure consistently elevated above his daytime readings, in a pattern that had developed gradually over 2 years. The correlation between the phone habit and the readings, once we mapped it, was clear. We made one change. Phone stays off for the first 20 minutes after waking, replaced by a short walk or gentle movement. His morning readings normalized within a month. The practical fix: after your 60-second seated transition from the bed, move gently before you reach for your phone. Even 5 minutes of slow walking or light stretching helps the morning hormonal surge resolve in the way the body intends it to. Here is what I want you to do starting tomorrow morning. When the alarm sounds, do not stand immediately. Sit on the edge of the bed for at least 60 seconds and let your cardiovascular system begin its adjustment. Then stand slowly and move gently for 5 minutes before reaching for your phone, your coffee, or your first task of the day. If you go to the bathroom first thing, do not strain. And if straining has been part of your mornings, bring that to your doctor as a cardiovascular conversation. When you do hydrate, use room temperature water and sip it gradually. And before your mind engages with the day's concerns, give yourself 2 minutes of slow breathing, 4 in, 6 out. That is the complete morning protocol. It adds perhaps 7 minutes to your waking routine and asks for almost no physical effort. What it does for the cardiovascular system navigating its most demanding daily window is genuinely protective. Everything I have shared today is meant to open a conversation with your physician, not replace one. Your heart history, your blood pressure pattern, your medications, and any existing cardiovascular diagnoses all shape how these habits apply to you specifically. Please bring this to your doctor. They are the right partner for turning general information into a plan that fits your individual situation. And if thinking about what your heart is experiencing in the first minutes of the day has raised questions about what else is quietly affecting it through the night, the next topic I want to explore with you is what happens to blood pressure and heart rhythm during sleep, and what the research now tells us about the cardiac significance of those overnight hours.